going on, everybody? Welcome back to Crimson Tide Today. I'm Zack Aitken, and I appreciate you joining me for another episode as we talk all things Alabama football. If you're enjoying the content, one of the best ways to support the channel is by hitting the like button, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing this video with another Alabama football fan. And make sure to leave a comment below. I always enjoy, hearing your opinions and discussing the biggest news and stories surrounding the Crimson Tide. I also want to give a huge shout out to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring this video. We've got a lot to dive into today, so we'll go ahead and kick off the opening drive. So we're getting closer and closer to Alabama kicking off the 2026 season, and now we have some clarity at one of the biggest position battles on this defense. Defensive coordinator Kane Womack, he confirmed that sophomore Luke Metz, he's going to be the starter inside linebacker alongside Caleb Woodson. And I think this is a pretty interesting development because coming into fall camp, we knew Woodson, he was probably going to be one of the starters. Alabama brought him in from Virginia Tech with a lot of experience, and he immediately looked like the guy who was going to become a leader in that linebacker room. But that second spot was wide open. You had Luke Metz, you had QB Reese, and there were several other young guys as well. And apparently Metz, he did enough throughout camp to separate himself. Remember, this is a guy who barely played on defense last season. He only logged around 23 defensive snaps, although he did appear in all 15 games because of his role on special teams. So this is going to be a pretty big jump for Metz. And when you listen to Womack talk about Luke Metz, I think you understand why he won the job. It isn't necessarily about Metz suddenly becoming the biggest or the fastest linebacker on the roster. It's from the shoulders up. It's about understanding the defense. Womack, he talked about his anticipation, his ability to recognize run fits, and maybe most importantly, his confidence to trust what he's seeing and go out and make a play. He even described Metz as having a little bit of that field general presence at linebacker. And that's exactly what Alabama needs at this position. Remember, Alabama lost a lot of experience at inside linebacker last season. So pairing Woodson, who's already played a lot of college football, with a younger player like Metz who understands the defense, it could give Alabama a really nice combination in the middle. But I don't think this means that we're only going to see these two guys at linebacker. Womack, he's made it very clear that Alabama likes its depth in that room and expects to play multiple guys at this position. And another thing that caught my attention was the pass rush as well. We know Yonze Pierre is supposed to be the main guy coming off the edge, but the big question is who else is going to step up? Womack, he also mentioned Devin Tompkins and Desmond Zulu, but he also brought up freshman Xavier Griffin. And Griffin, he's really cool because he gives Alabama different ways that he can be used. Womack, he compared some of that versatility to some other guys we've seen, like Jihad Campbell, somebody with an outside linebacker background, but can also move around and play on the inside. And I'm not saying that, Griffin is immediately going to become Jihad Campbell. I think that's a little unfair. But when your defensive coordinator is already talking about finding ways to use a freshman like that, you're going to pay attention. And there was also some encouraging news that we'll dive into a little deeper, but I wanted to talk about the secondary. Dre Kirkpatrick Jr., he's continuing to make plays, and Womack said that Alabama can use him at Husky, Rover, and even free safety. He also praised Chuck McDonald, saying his man coverage and understanding of the defense and anticipation, they've all been improving. And that's important because one of the things I've liked about Alabama's defense all offseason is the potential depth. We all knew who the stars are going to be, but it's guys like Metz and Kirkpatrick and McDonald and Griffin and some of the other younger guys who could determine just how good this defense becomes. And with the season getting closer, we're finally getting to see just exactly how Kane Womack plans on putting all of these pieces together. For Luke Metz specifically, though, this is a big opportunity. He went from primarily being a special teams player last season to earning a starting job in the middle of Alabama's defense. Now we'll find out what that coaching staff has been seeing through camp and see if it carries over when the games actually begin. And if it does, Alabama may have found its next young linebacker to build around. So obviously we've been talking all offseason about the offensive line and it being one of the biggest question marks for Alabama heading into 2026. And now with the season opener against East Carolina right around the corner, it sounds like we're finally getting a pretty good idea of what that starting five is going to look like. Ryan Grubb said Alabama is close to settling in on its starting five at offensive line, and really there may be only one legitimate competition left. Right now, the group appears to be Jackson Lloyd at left tackle, Rayson Delgado at center, Michael Carroll at right guard, and Javen James at right tackle. Left guard, it's still a battle between Mal Waldrop and Will Sanders. But let's start with right tackle because I think that's one of the more interesting developments. It sounds like Javen James has clearly pulled ahead. Grubb, he said James has been taking the majority of the first team reps at right tackle, despite the Texas transfer Nick Brooks pushing him during fall camp. And I've talked about James before in our player preview series. He's an interesting player because he doesn't necessarily look like some of those, massive offensive tackles that Alabama's had in the past. But he does bring some experience. James, he transferred in from Mississippi State after starting 9 games there. And when you're rebuilding an offensive line, having somebody who's already played meaningful SEC football, it becomes extremely valuable. And that's really the story of this entire offensive line. Alabama, they lost a lot of starters from last year's group, and Michael Carroll is one big guy that's going to be a key piece coming back, and he's even changing positions. He started 6 games at right tackle last season, but now he's moving back inside to guard, which I think that's his true position. So there's a lot of change happening here. Jackson Lloyd barely touched the field as a freshman last year, but he apparently did enough in the spring to lock down that left tackle job. Rayson Delgado, he came in through the transfer portal after beginning his career at Cal Poly, and he quickly established himself at the starting center. But there's also the left guard, and that's probably the position I'm watching the closest right now because Mal Waldrop has made this a legit competition with Will Sanders. And I don't know how many people would have predicted that going into the offseason. Sanders, he was part of Alabama's offensive line rotation last year, and Waldrop, he only appeared in 2 games. But Sanders, he missed the spring with an injury, and Waldrop, he got an opportunity, and he apparently took advantage of it. Grubb, he's praised Waldrop's toughness and physicality and his intelligence. And now Waldrop and Sanders, they've been trading first-team reps at left guard. So we'll see who ultimately wins that job, but here's the bigger picture for me. Alabama doesn't necessarily need this offensive line to be dominant immediately. They need to be dependable first. They've already named Keelan Russell as the starting quarterback, and he's extremely talented, but he's still very young. The best thing Alabama can do for him is giving him a running game and keep him constantly, free from dealing with pressure from the pass rush. And that's why this offensive line, it might ultimately determine the ceiling of this offense. Ryan Grubb, I think he's got plenty of weapons, and I think he's got a quarterback that he clearly believes in. But none of this is going to matter if Alabama can't consistently block people at the line of scrimmage. The encouraging part, though, is I think we're finally seeing some stability. Lloyd at left tackle, Delgado at center, and Carroll at right guard. And James, he's looking like the clear favorite at right tackle. And Waldrop and Sanders, they're battling for that final spot. So that's probably going to be your starting 5. But now the question isn't necessarily who's going to play. It's whether Adrian Clem can get those 5 guys playing together at a high level. Because if this offensive line takes a legit step forward in 2026, I think Alabama's offense has a chance to be really good. And with East Carolina coming up in September 5th, I think we're getting very close to finding out exactly what this group is going to look like when the games actually matter. So, Alabama fans, let's talk about the matchup with East Carolina. I'm expecting the Crimson Tide to take care of business, and the folks over at Kalshi are seeing it the exact same way. Right now, Kalshi gives Alabama a 97% chance of winning, and that's a pretty strong vote of confidence. And if you're following college football, Kalshi, it gives you a way to trade on your predictions about real-world events, including sports. So if you think Alabama is going to roll against East Carolina, go ahead and head over to Kalshi and check out the market and see what the current probabilities that I'm telling you about. For me, I'm rolling with the Tide, and check out Kalshi to see the latest market. And that's Kalshi. Trade on anything. The Keelan Russell at Alabama, it's officially here, and it seems like everyone inside of Alabama's football facility seems to have an opinion on him. Alabama General Manager Courtney Morgan, he recently talked about Russell, and the phrase that really stood out to me was pretty simple. This guy's a special talent. And look, I don't think that's going to surprise anybody who's been following Keelan Russell's career. This is a former 5-star quarterback, and he was one of the best players in the country coming out of high school. He's got the arm talent, he's athletic, and he can make all the plays outside and inside the pocket. But what's really interesting is how quickly he's apparently developed into someone Alabama trusts to run this offense. Because you got to remember, Keelan Russell didn't just walk in and take this job. He had to beat out Austin Mack. And Mack, he had a lot going for him. He's older. He's been in Kalen DeBoer's system for years. And he followed DeBoer from Washington to Alabama. And coming into this competition, I thought that experience it gave Mack a legit chance to win this job. But Russell apparently made it impossible for Alabama to keep him off the field. DeBoer officially named him the starter earlier this week after a competition that went throughout the offseason and into fall camp. And that's what excites me about all this. Alabama didn't have to start Keelan Russell. They did have another option. So if you're willing to put the offense in the hands of a redshirt freshman who's never started a college game, that tells me this coaching staff believes the upside was worth it. And Courtney Morgan, he knows Russell extremely well. Remember, Morgan, he played a major role in recruiting him to Alabama in the first place. Russell, he was originally committed to SMU before flipping to Alabama in June 2024. And that was a huge recruiting win for Kalen DeBoer and this staff because Alabama needed to prove it could still go out and land an elite quarterback after Nick Saban retired. And Russell became the first of one of those guys. Now, just over a little bit of 2 years later, he's QB1. And I think there's another important part to all of this. We started to hear that Russell simply isn't relying on his physical talent. Ryan Grubb, he recently said Russell is ahead of schedule when it comes to the pre-snap part of playing quarterback, and that's huge because we've never really questioned whether Keelan Russell can throw the ball. The question's always been, can he process everything? Can he identify the pressure? Can he get Alabama into the right play? And can he make good decisions when Georgia brings pressure on third down? Because that's typically where the young quarterbacks struggle. And I'm sure Russell is going to have some of those moments this year. He's going to have mistakes. There's probably going to be a throw or two where we're sitting there wondering, Keelan, what were you looking at? But that's all a part of playing quarterback, especially when you're young. But the upside, it's just too hard to ignore. When I look at this Alabama offense, I think Russell gives Ryan Grubb something really interesting because of his ability to create something when it breaks down, especially with an offensive line that has a lot of questions and is being rebuilt from the ground up. Sometimes your quarterback, it's going to have to make something happen, and Russell, he can do that. And ultimately, that's why I'm excited to watch this. We've been spending months talking about this quarterback competition, Austin Mack and Keelan Russell, the young bull or the old bull and the young calf, so to speak. But Alabama, they've made their choice, and they're going with the upside with the young guy. And when you hear somebody like Courtney Morgan, who's a guy who helped recruit Russell and has watched his development inside the program and describes him as a special talent, I think it only adds to the expectations. But the fun part's going to be very soon. We finally get to see him in live action. September 5th against East Carolina, Keelan Russell, he's going to walk onto that field at Bryant-Denny Stadium as Alabama's starting quarterback for the very first time. And I think that could be the beginning of something very exciting in Tuscaloosa. We're continuing our Alabama player preview series today, and today we're talking about a name that should be very familiar with Alabama fans, and that's Dre Kirkpatrick Jr. And yeah, obviously that name, it's going to carry some weight around Alabama. Dre, he's the son of former All-American corner Dre Kirkpatrick, who played under Nick Saban and won a couple national championships and was a first-round NFL draft pick who spent around a decade in the NFL. But now Jr., he's trying to make his own name in Tuscaloosa. And heading into the 2026 season, I think this could be the year where we finally see him carve out a legit role on Alabama's defense. Kirkpatrick, he's a junior out of Gadsden City High School in Gadsden, Alabama, and he wasn't the big-time five-star recruit that his dad was. Junior, he was considered a three-star guy coming out of high school and wasn't ranked among the top players nationally in that 2024 recruiting class, but Alabama liked him enough to bring him into the program, and over the last couple years, he's continuing to develop. Physically, Alabama now has Kirkpatrick as 5'11 and 207 pounds. And that 207, it's very important because when you watch the way he plays, he's not afraid of contact. He's a physical type of defensive back. He wants to come downhill. He can tackle. And I think some of that physicality is one of the reasons Kane Womack has so many different ideas on how he wants to use him this season. Kirkpatrick, he hasn't played a massive role defensively yet. As a freshman in 2024, he appeared in 13 games and finished with 3 tackles. Last season, he played in 8 games and recorded 9 tackles, 1 TFL, a forced fumble, and a pass breakup. So we're talking about 12 season tackles through his first 2 seasons. But I think those numbers, they could be a little misleading where we're projecting him in 2026. because Alabama apparently really likes what Kirkpatrick can do with this defense. Womack, he talked about his instincts, and that's probably one of the biggest things that stands out to me. This is now year 3 for Kirkpatrick and Womack's system. He understands the defense, and he understands the responsibility at multiple positions. And because of that, Alabama doesn't necessarily have to pigeonhole him into one specific type of DB. Womack, he said Kirkpatrick can play the Husky, he can play Rover, and he can even go over and play free safety. And I think that versatility could be his path to being on the field. But let's be very clear, Alabama does have some really good defensive backs. You've got Keon Sapp and Bray Hubbard at safety. Red Morgan is coming back at Husky. And then Xavier Brown and Dejon Lee, they give you 2 really good corners on the outside. So Kirkpatrick, he probably isn't going to walk into week 1 as one of the starters at Alabama as one of the 5 defensive backs, but I don't think that necessarily means he won't play. I think that he could become one of those chess pieces that Kane Womack moves around depending on the situation. You could put him at, closer to the line of scrimmage and blitz him off the edge, and you can also use him in run support. And because he's been in the system for 3 years, I think you can move him around without completely changing what you're doing defensively. And I think that's where Drake Kirkpatrick Jr. becomes really interesting. He's not necessarily coming into 2026 with a lot of hype. He's not one of those first names that, people mention when they're talking about this Alabama defense, but he's experienced enough now where it's time for him to take that next step. And there's also something really cool about seeing another Kirkpatrick wearing that crimson. His dad made his name at Alabama as a physical DB who wasn't afraid to hit somebody, even if it was a corner. But Junior, now he has that opportunity to establish his own identity. And based on what we're hearing from Kane Womack, I think we're going to see a lot more of number 21 in 2026. Maybe it's at Husky, maybe it's at safety, but probably it's going to be a little bit of everything. But Drake Kirkpatrick Jr., he's absolutely a name I will keep an eye on as we get closer into the season. So guys, that's going to do it for today's show. If you like today's video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update as we get closer to kickoff and another great season of Alabama football. For more Crimson Tide coverage throughout the week, including recruiting news and team updates and breaking developments, be sure to follow me on Instagram and X at ZAitken7. So guys, I thank you for hanging out with me today and talking some ball. I appreciate your support, and we'll catch you guys in the next video. I hope you all enjoy your weekend, and until next time, roll Tide.